The sharp, clinical glare of the crystal chandeliers inside the grand reception hall of the athletic club felt like an interrogation light slicing through my composure. The ambient noise of high society chatter, the soft clinking of expensive champagne flutes, and the low hum of a classical string quartet provided a deceptive background to the predatory display of family arrogance unfolding before me. I stood perfectly still near the edge of the polished marble floor, my fingers lightly holding a simple glass of sparkling water, my plain off-the-rack navy blazer standing out like a gray shadow against the sea of designer tuxedos and glittering silk gowns. My younger brother, Parker, stood less than 3 feet away, his chest aggressively puffed out beneath his custom-tailored Italian suit, a smug, intoxicating wave of unearned power radiating from his every posture. He was holding a premium glass of aged single malt scotch, swirling the amber liquid with a slow, patronizing arrogance as he looked down at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated contempt. Standing directly beside him was a man whose very presence commanded the absolute, fearful reverence of the entire city's corporate ecosystem, Theodore Ramsey, the brilliant, unyielding billionaire chief executive officer of Ramsey Global Infrastructure. Parker had been desperately clawing his way up the corporate ladder of Ramsey's logistics division for 2 years, utilizing a loud bravado and a network of family-funded manipulations to project an illusion of corporate brilliance. "This is the sibling I was telling you about, Mr. Ramsey," Parker announced, his voice carrying with a sharp, calculated loudness that intentionally cut through the nearby conversations, ensuring that several prominent board members turned to watch the humiliation. "This is my older sister, Cassandra, the undisputed family failure who still works as a temporary, low-level data entry clerk in our auxiliary processing facility downtown. Our parents spent hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to provide her with a foundational baseline for success, but she simply lacked the natural corporate drive and the analytical intellect required to survive in a high-stakes executive environment. I always feel an intense wave of personal obligation to invite her to these elite community galas, just so she can catch a brief glimpse of what true operational excellence and real-world success look like." My mother, Maria, who was standing just behind Parker's shoulder draped in expensive velvet, let out a soft, dismissive sigh of mock sympathy, nodding her head in perfect synchronization with her favorite son's venomous words. "It is a tragic reality, Mr. Ramsey, but some children are simply born to remain in the background, executing the simple, repetitive tasks while the true leaders build the family legacy," my mother chimed in, her tone dripping with a weaponized, passive-aggressive disappointment that had defined my entire childhood. "We've had to completely insulate Parker from her negative, stagnant energy, because a rising executive star cannot be dragged down by the domestic failures of a sibling who lives in a cramped apartment near the rail yards." I didn't flinch, I didn't lower my eyes, and I didn't let a single flicker of human emotion breach the calm, stoic mask of my face, because my extensive training in global corporate warfare had taught me that a true commander never reveals her strategy until the trap is fully closed. Theodore Ramsey stood entirely silent, his sharp, penetrating gray eyes shifting from Parker's flushed, arrogant face down to my serene, unbothered expression, his jaw tightly clenching beneath his silver-rimmed glasses. He didn't offer Parker a warm chuckle of agreement, and he didn't validate my mother's superficial high society posturing. He simply took a slow, deliberate breath, his gaze lingering on my folded hands with an intense, calculated seriousness that made Parker's smile falter slightly. "I think your sister understands the absolute weight of operational reality far better than you realize, Parker," Mr. Ramsey stated, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that carried a chilling undercurrent of authority before he turned his back on them and walked toward the VIP lounge. Parker let out a nervous, aggressive laugh, turning to my mother to whisper a derogatory joke about my plain appearance, fully confident that he had successfully buried my reputation forever in front of the most powerful man in the state. They believed that their unearned luxury lifestyle was completely secure and that they could continue to use my quiet nature as a disposable doormat to feed Parker's insatiable desire for dominance and narcissistic pride. They had absolutely no idea that the silent, invisible sister they treated like a failure was the single variable that held the absolute monopoly over their survival. The true, spectacular corporate twist of my hidden existence unfolded at precisely 10 o'clock the following Monday morning inside the sterile confines of my modest, windowless office downtown. I sat behind a simple metal desk, the dual monitors displaying rows of complex data, when the heavy security door was thrown open without a single warning page from the front desk. I looked up, expecting to see a panicked courier or a local warehouse supervisor demanding a routing clearance file for the shipping manifests. Instead, the imposing figure of CEO Theodore Ramsey stepped through the threshold, followed by two senior executive vice presidents who immediately closed the door and stood at attention against the concrete wall. Mr. Ramsey didn't look at the small room with condescension or irritation. He took off his gold-rimmed glasses, stepped directly to the center of the space, and offered a deep, reverent bow of absolute professional respect. Legendary turnaround consultant Cassandra Miles, I believe our official paths have finally crossed under the correct operational parameters, Theodore Ramsey announced, his voice filled with a profound warmth that would have left my brother Parker completely breathless. I spent the entire weekend processing the absolute disgust of what occurred at the athletic club gala, and I want to personally apologize for the unyielding ignorance of the employees carrying your last name. When my first global logistics firm was facing a catastrophic, multi-million-dollar structural collapse 5 years ago, it was your anonymous, undercover consulting agency that stepped into our servers in the dead of night. You re-engineered our entire international maritime matrix, exposed our internal saboteurs, and saved thousands of jobs without ever allowing your face or your true identity to be leaked to the financial press. I retained your elite corporate auditing services for this division 3 weeks ago under an absolute shield of cryptographic secrecy, and I had no idea that the brilliant mind hiding behind the pseudonym was the sister Parker was bragging about destroying. I stood up slowly from my chair, my posture entirely upright, my expression carrying a sharp, dangerous calm that radiated the true sovereignty of my executive status. The apology is fully accepted, Theodore, but the personal sentiments must now be set aside because your logistics division is actively bleeding from a severe internal cancer, I stated, my voice flat, level, and entirely cold. My brother Parker believes I am a low-level data entry clerk because I chose to occupy this modest office to execute a complete, subterranean audit of his regional supply chain files without alerting his network of enablers. For the last 21 days, my software systems have been mapping every single invoice, expense report, and client contract executed under his management signature. The data trail does not point to an ambitious young executive rising through the ranks. It points to a calculated, multi-layered criminal enterprise caught in active progress. I opened my secure, carbon fiber briefcase, activating a biometric encryption key that illuminated my monitors with a vast, terrifying tapestry of forensic financial ledgers. It was time to unleash a systematic forensic audit warfare that would completely dismantle my brother's unearned reality, piece by single mathematical piece. The data trail compiled within my secure servers revealed a dark, sickening layer of corporate deception that far exceeded standard professional incompetence. 6 months prior, Parker's division had proudly announced the acquisition of a massive, multi-million-dollar retail distribution contract with a global manufacturing titan, an achievement that had earned him a massive promotion and the personal praise of the entire board of directors. But my forensic deep dive into the internal project metadata and the time-stamped communication logs revealed a grotesque, criminal plot twist. Parker had not written a single line of the winning corporate proposal, nor had he participated in the grueling, 90-hour operational strategy sessions required to secure the client's trust. The entire multi-million-dollar retail contract was the exclusive, brilliant work of a brilliant but silenced 23-year-old junior analyst named David Vance, who worked in a cramped cubicle at the bottom of the corporate hierarchy. Parker had discovered David's completed strategy files on a shared network drive, systematically locked the junior analyst out of the system architecture, and applied his own executive signature to the final submission pages. He had threatened to terminate David's employment and blacklisted his name from the industry if the young analyst ever dared to expose the theft, effectively stealing the boy's life-changing achievement to build his own fake crown. But the white-collar treason didn't stop at intellectual property theft. It extended directly into the primary capital reserves of Ramsey Global Infrastructure. My audit of Parker's executive digital checkbook exposed a systemic, multi-layered pattern of severe embezzlement and corporate compliance fraud. Over a rolling 24-month timeline, Parker had fraudulently submitted over $110,000 in corporate expense reports. He had forged the signatures of auxiliary compliance managers, using the company's high-priority operational accounts to finance his luxury personal vacations, expensive country club memberships, and gold watches for his high-society friends. He had hidden the siphoned capital behind a web of dummy marketing shell companies and altered digital receipts, fully confident that his status as the family's golden child and a rising executive star would protect him from any real inspection. He had spent years treating my hard work with absolute disdain, while he was actively robbing the very billionaire who paid his salary, completely blind to the fact that his entire criminal footprint was currently being formatted into a federal indictment sheet. I bound the complete digital package, the 4K video scans of the forged expense summaries, the unedited metadata proving the theft of David Vance's contract, and the cryptocurrency routing paths into an unbreakable, cloud-backed legal folder. The time for quiet observation had officially concluded. The corporate battlefield was fully prepared, and it was time to execute an explosive public karma reveal that would shatter his world forever. The dramatic climax of the corporate warfare was scheduled to unfold at precisely 9 o'clock on Friday morning inside the high-stakes environment of the 12th floor executive boardroom. The atmosphere inside the soundproofed room was thick with a suffocating, terrifying tension as the senior board members and the primary venture capitalists took their seats around the long mahogany conference table. Parker sat near the head of the table, his posture radiating a supreme, unyielding arrogance as he adjusted his designer tie, fully confident that the emergency meeting had been called to announce his final elevation to an executive vice president seat. My father, Tony, and my mother, Maria, had been granted special gallery access to the room, sitting in the velvet armchairs near the back wall, their faces filled with a smug, triumphant pride as they prepared to watch their favorite son's grand coronation. Theodore Ramsey stepped into the boardroom, his face an absolute mask of pure, unadulterated clinical ice, as he bypassed the head seat and stood directly before the digital presentation screens. We are assembled this morning to address a severe, existential crisis regarding the operational integrity of our regional logistics division, Mr. Ramsey announced, his voice carrying a freezing authority that made the air in the room feel instantly heavy. Before we review our quarterly expansion plans, our senior turnaround consultant will present a high-priority compliance disclosure that requires the immediate vote of this board. The heavy mahogany double doors at the rear of the room swung open with a sharp, mechanical click, and I stepped into the blinding light of the boardroom. I was no longer wearing the plain, unbranded blazer from the gala. I wore a pristine, custom-tailored executive suit that framed my posture with a terrifying aura of absolute command, my carbon fiber briefcase clicking sharply against my fingers. Parker let out a loud, mocking scoff, violently standing up from his leather chair as his face twisted into a mask of pure, unbridled irritation. "What is the meaning of this joke, Mr. Ramsey?" Parker roared, pointing a manicured finger directly at my face as he looked around the room. "This is an executive board session, and my failure of a sister has absolutely no legal standing to enter this space. She is a low-level data clerk who was probably sent here to deliver the extra paper files. Security, remove this girl from my boardroom immediately." "Sit down, Parker," Theodore Ramsey commanded, his voice dropping into a low, terrifying growl that caused my brother's jaw to instantly freeze midair. "Your sister possesses more legal standing in this corporation than you will ever see in your entire natural existence." I placed my briefcase on the mahogany table, snapped the locks open with a crisp, definitive ring, and executed a total, system-wide data override of the centralized media networks. The presentation screens violently flashed from our standard expansion metrics into a series of high-resolution, cold forensic financial ledgers that sent an immediate shockwave of pure horror through the room. The monitors displayed the certified bank embezzlement alerts, the matching IP footprints from Parker's personal device, and the unedited metadata proving he had stolen the multi-million-dollar retail contract from David Vance. The crowd of board members gasped in absolute, breathless loathing as the raw, desperate criminal fraud of the Golden Child was laid bare in high-definition detail before the city's most powerful investors. "This is a complete, unassailable forensic record of your corporate tenure, Parker," I stated, my voice smooth, chillingly calm, and carrying an immense resonance that silenced his cries completely. "You didn't write that retail contract. You stole it from a junior analyst through digital identity coercion, and you have siphoned exactly $110,000 from our corporate expense reserves to fund your unearned country club lifestyle. Your signature codes have already been permanently revoked from our capital networks. You are stripped of your titles effective this exact second, and you are officially terminated from Ramsey Global Infrastructure for gross criminal misconduct." My mother, Maria, rushed forward from the gallery, her face turning a grotesque shade of pale ash as she tried to grab my arm, her voice shaking with a desperate, weaponized maternal fury. "Cassandra, stop this evil jealousy immediately. You are fabricating these digital numbers because you can't stand to see your own brother succeed in a world you were too weak to handle," she shrieked, her voice cracking under the panic. The heavy double doors opened one final time, and two uniformed state law enforcement officers, accompanied by investigators from the White-Collar Fraud Division, entered the boardroom with a heavy, definitive stride. They didn't offer my parents an emotional debate or allow Parker a single second to collect his designer belongings. They read him his criminal rights right in front of the entire board of directors. With a swift, mechanical precision, the deputy sheriff forced Parker's arms behind his back, sliding the cold, heavy steel handcuffs over his wrists with a sharp, metallic click that echoed through the silent room like an executioner's axe. Parker let out a horrified, breathless shriek of pure psychological collapse, his weaponized arrogance completely dissolving into a frantic, desperate weeping as he was led down the executive hallway in full view of the local press cameras. My father stumbled backward against the gallery chairs, his eyes bulging with a sudden, suffocating terror as he realized his favorite son was facing a mandatory federal prison sentence. Completely ruined and socially dead before the afternoon could even begin. The legal boardroom execution was an absolute, flawless victory, but the final, most devastating layer of human karma was scheduled to unfold 2 days later away from the corporate spotlight. My Aunt Irene, a woman of immense integrity and the single maternal relative who had always maintained a quiet, protective respect for my independent path, hosted a mandatory family dinner at her historic estate. The atmosphere inside the dining room was thick with a suffocating, silent dread, the long oak table decorated with a simple dinner that sat entirely untouched beneath the dim light of the overhead fixtures. My parents sat on the edge of their chairs, their faces lined with the deep, exhausting wrinkles of a couple whose unearned high society world had completely dissolved into pure ash within less than 48 hours. They had spent the weekend trying to find a corrupt legal loophole or secure a multi-thousand-dollar bail loan to rescue Parker from the county jail facilities, only to find every single banking line locked tight by the state auditors. Aunt Irene stood at the head of the table, her face a mask of absolute severity as she looked down at my mother, before sliding a heavy, dusty blue legal binder directly into the center of the white tablecloth. "This is the original, certified fiduciary ledger of the Legacy Educational Trust Fund that our late grandmother established 20 years ago," Aunt Irene announced, her voice carrying a sharp finality that made my father instantly freeze. "I have spent the last 48 hours working alongside Cassandra's corporate compliance attorneys, and we have finally mapped the complete, dark reality of what you did to your eldest daughter." The devastating family plot twist laid itself bare across the table with the cold, mathematical certainty of a death warrant. When I was a child, my grandmother had established a private, $50,000 childhood education fund strictly designated to finance my future enrollment at an elite design and business university. But my parents, Maria and Tony, had quietly executed a fraudulent legal maneuver 12 years ago, utilizing an administrative loophole to systematically drain the entire fund behind my back. They had siphoned every single dollar of my educational security, transferring the $50,000 directly into Parker's private accounts to finance his luxury elite preparatory academies and his failed lifestyle ventures. They had intentionally forced me into a state of artificially constructed poverty, forcing me to work double shifts since the age of 14 and branding me as a family failure, all to conceal the fact that they had stolen my grandmother's love to finance a verified, lifelong fraudster. They needed me to believe I was a broke, incompetent outcast so I would never have the financial power or the legal confidence to check the state trust registries or discover their identity forgery scheme. The sheer, disgusting depravity of their choice settled deep into the room, causing my mother to bury her face in her trembling hands as a ragged, emotional sob escaped her lips. We only did it because we thought Parker was the only one who could save our family's commercial reputation, Tony whispered, his voice rough, broken, and entirely stripped of the booming authority he used to terrorize me with during my youth. We were facing a severe contract contraction. The logistics market was failing, and we genuinely believed that if we cushioned Parker's education, he would grow up to restore our fortunes and protect his sister. We didn't mean to make you feel worthless, Cassandra. We were just desperate, and now the bank is foreclosing on our home to pay back his corporate embezzlement penalties, and we have absolutely nothing left to survive. I looked across the table at the two people who had sacrificed my childhood and stolen my future to feed the insatiable greed of a criminal parasite, my face remaining entirely serene, free of any remaining anger or resentment. Your desperation was a choice, Father, and your favorite son didn't save your empire. He turned it into a federal crime scene, I said, my voice smooth, quiet, and carrying an unyielding level of peaceful finality. You spent 27 years treating my existence like an auxiliary asset to be plundered, and you are finally being forced to live in the silent, empty desert of your own creation. I stood up from the table, leaving the dusty blue ledger resting in the shadows, and walked out of the historic estate into the cool evening air without a single beat of hesitation, regret, or emotional weight. The pacing of my life slowed down beautifully over the subsequent months, allowing the frantic trauma of my past to transition into a continuous current of pure serenity and absolute personal triumph. The board of directors at Ramsey Global Infrastructure voted unanimously to pass the supreme corporate command directly into my hands, naming me as the permanent, unilateral executive equity partner and sovereign managing director of the entire global supply chain conglomerate. I stabilized the shipping lines, promoted the brilliant junior analyst David Vance to his rightful executive strategy seat, and built a workplace culture based entirely on merit, absolute integrity, and unyielding respect. I purchased a magnificent, sun-filled coastal estate far away from the toxic circles of my childhood, filling my sanctuary with peaceful silence, beautiful literature, and true clarity. My parents and brother were left to survive on the meager, bitter returns of their choices, buried beneath the weight of a public disgrace and a total bankruptcy that would follow them for the rest of their natural lives. Parker was sentenced to a substantial period in a maximum security state facility for white-collar fraud and grand larceny, his expensive designer suits replaced by a sterile prison uniform where his bravado carried exactly zero value. My parents were legally evicted from their suburban mansion, forced to downsize into a cramped, run-down two-bedroom apartment on the industrial outskirts of the city where the trains shook the thin walls at all hours of the night. As I stand on the private observation deck of my new home this evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in vibrant shades of gold and deep violet, a profound, permanent sense of total liberation settles into my soul. I had turned the coldest family exploitation into a spectacular masterpiece of pure self-worth, walking into the future fully vindicated, enormously wealthy, and completely free. If you are listening to this story right now, and you are the child whose silence, boundaries, and hard work have been systematically weaponized by the people who share your last name, Hear me clearly. Your value is never defined by the absolute blindness or the predatory greed of a toxic household dynamic that refuses to see your true worth. Strength does not mean enduring financial fraud, emotional neglect, or identity manipulation for the sake of a fake family piece that only serves the thieves in your life. True power is born the exact moment you stop begging for the validation of people who trade love for currency, and you begin to use your own brilliant mind to establish unbreakable walls around your future. My corporate victory was a beautiful achievement, a complete deployment of forensic strategy that permanently protected my legacy from the hands of criminals. But the true victory, the one that allowed me to look into the mirror every single morning with a peaceful, confident smile, was the absolute freedom of knowing that I am more than enough. Home is not a geographic structure defined by a shared surname, a genetic code, or the toxic obligation to sacrifice your youth for people who treat your existence like a convenience. Home is where your boundaries are treated as absolute, where your hard work is genuinely honored, and above all else, home is where you are respected.